Hello and welcome to Neo Psychology of me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. Today we're carrying on with the attachment unit and we're looking at lesson 7, Bowlby's monotropic theory. Let's get started. Why do we find babies so cute? Some of us. I do. And not just human babies, babies of animals too. Is there a reason for this? Do they have something in common? Okay, we're going to learn a few key terms today, okay? We've got 4 learning objectives today. We're going to have a look at showing comprehension and applying knowledge of monotropy. Learning objective 2, identify and analyze social releases and the critical period. We've heard that term before. 3, review and investigate the internal working model. And then finally, discuss and evaluate Bowlby's monotropic theory. Let's start with monotropy. Last lesson, lesson 6, we learned about the learning theory of attachment. Attachments are formed through classical and operant conditioning centering around food. Food was the main determining factor that created an attachment. The specification, AQA, identifies a second explanation for the formation of attachment, Bowlby's monotropic theory, which has become the dominant theory of attachment in psychology. Previously, it was in the 1950s and 60s, we understood the learning theory as the dominant theory of attachment. However, nowadays we have a more concurrence about Bowlby's monotropic theory, and that's what we're going to learn today. John Bowlby rejected the learning theory as an explanation for attachment because he said, were it true, an infant of a year or 2 should take readily to whomever feeds him. And this is clearly not the case. Okay? So Bowlby contradicts this learning theory. Instead, Bowlby looked at the work of Lorenz and Harlow for ideas and proposed an evolutionary explanation that attachment was an innate system that gave a survival advantage. Innate meaning unlearned, meaning it's natural, it naturally occurs. As we saw in previous lessons, imprinting and attachment evolved because they ensure that young animals stay close to their caregivers and this protects them from hazards. That was research that was done by Lorenz with his geese and Harlow with his monkeys. Millions of years ago, this might have been wild animals, but today, this survival instinct today is helping us survive from traffic and electricity, possibly. John Bowlby worked as a psychiatrist in London, treating emotionally disturbed children, similar to what was found with Harlow's monkeys. Bowlby observed that a number of the children he treated that were emotionally disturbed had experienced early separations from their families, which led him to propose his first theory, the theory of maternal deprivation. In this theory, he proposed that children deprived of an early strong attachment may suffer permanent long-term emotional maladjustment or disturbance. But this is something we're going to look into more detail in a later lesson. Today, though, we're looking at Bowlby's monotropic theory. Bowlby's maternal deprivation theory led Bowlby to think further about the nature and function of the attachment bond. The research by Lorenz and Harlow in the 1950s had a profound influence on Bowlby's subsequent theory of attachment. And he first published an article on his theory, monotropic attachment theory, in 1969. And this is what we'll be looking at today. Okay. John Bowlby was born into an upper middle class family and raised mainly by a nanny. His son Richard Bowlby, or Sir Richard Bowlby, explains how this led to his father's interest in attachment. So this isn't in the the specification, but this is just a bit of background information that I thought was quite interesting. It was a quote from John Bowlby's son, Sir Richard Bowlby, which gives us an idea of why he was actually interested in attachment. Here's the quote. The origin of my father's motivation for working on attachment probably stems from a traumatic childhood. His father, my grandfather, was a successful surgeon who lived in a large London townhouse with his wife and 6 children. The children, as was normal for the time, were raised by nannies. The children only saw their mothers for 1 hour each day, and even then the children went to see her all together, so there wasn't exactly individual quality time. My father grew to love his nanny called Minnie, and I have little doubt that she was his surrogate primary attachment figure. But when he was 4 years old, Minnie left the family. He lost his mother figure, and his primary attachment bond was broken. He was then sent away to boarding school when he was 8 years old, causing further trauma. I think one thing that saved him was that he did have those 4 years of secure attachment with Minnie. So, it gives you a little bit background of Bowlby. It gives you a little bit background about, his upbringing. He was in an upper middle class family, but he had very little time with his mother. So his primary attachment figure was likely to be with his nanny. And I think that gives us a better understanding why he wanted to look into this idea of attachment. Right, monotropy. Bowlby's theory is described as monotropic because he placed great emphasis on a child's attachment to one particular caregiver, hence the word mono. And he believed that the child's attachment to this one caregiver is different and more important than others. So Bowlby's monotropic theory essentially is saying we form one attachment first, and this one attachment is really important and more important than any of the others. And who is it likely that is good? Who is likely to be a child's primary attachment figure, your monotropic attachment? It's likely to be to the mother, first of all. Bowlby called this person the mother, but was clear that it need not be the biological mother. Bowlby believed that the more time a baby spent with his mother figure, or primary attachment figure, as we usually call them now, the better. The more time with the mother, the better it was. That was according to Bowlby. Some people may disagree with that, and that's up to you. Bowlby put forward 2 principles to clarify this. 1, the law of continuity, and 2, the law of accumulated separation. The law of continuity stated that the more constant and predictable a child's care, the better the quality of their attachment. The law of accumulative separation stated that the effects of every separation from the mother adds up, and, quote, the safest dose of separation is therefore a 0 dose. Right? Bowlby really thought it was important that the mother was with the child as much as possible, and there should be no separation from the mother. Right, monotropy, right? Complete the definition. It's a key term. You need to remember it. Give it a go, please, right? If you want to challenge yourself, try summarizing the key term into 6 words, or draw an image that illustrates the key term monotropy. Give that a go now, please. And let's go through the answers. I haven't given you the words because I think you can work it out. Monotropy is a term sometimes used to describe whose theory? Bowlby's theory. The mono means, what does mono mean? One, and indicates that one particular attachment is different from all others and of special significance to the child's emotional development. Okay? That is monotropy. Okay, that's the first key term we're going to learn today. Identify one thing you've learned about monotropy. Why do you think learning about it is important? How does monotropy apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? and that's monotropy. Tick it off. Do it with me. Did you do it? Why not? Right. Learning objective 2. Identify and analyze social releases and the critical period. The critical period is something you looked at before, but we haven't looked at what social releases are. What is that? Mr. Neo, help me out. What does that mean? Don't worry, I got you. Bowlby suggested that babies are born with a set of innate, natural, cute behaviours like smiling, cooing, and gripping that encourage attention from adults. He called these social releases because their purpose is to activate the adult attachment system, i.e. make an adult feel love towards the baby. So, what Bowlby is suggesting is babies have this innate, this natural cute behaviours that he calls social releases. So what Bowlby suggests is the reason why babies are so cute and smiley and make cute noises and they grip our fingers is because it's a survival mechanism. If babies did this, the adults are more likely to feel love towards the baby and maybe form an attachment and therefore care for, feed and love the baby and therefore promote survival. Those babies that didn't have these social releases, these cute behaviours, they were less likely to be taken care of, therefore they were more likely to die and not survive, and therefore less likely to pass on those genes. Bowlby recognised that attachment was a reciprocal two-way process, reciprocity. Both mother and baby have an innate predisposition or a tendency to become attached, and social releases trigger that response in carers. So adults, parents also have this tendency, this innate predisposition to love and take care and nurture our babies. Someone might argue women more so than men. The interplay between infant and adult attachment systems gradually build the relationship between infant and caregiver, beginning in the early weeks of life. Bowlby proposed that there is a critical period of around 2 years when the infant attachment system is active. So, we had a look at the critical period before. We had a look at the critical period in Lorenz's research with grey-lag geese. Lorenz suggested there was a critical period of around a few hours after hatching with those geese. If they didn't imprint in those couple hours or few hours after hatch, they will never be able to imprint. Harlow found a similar thing with his rhesus monkeys, and he found that there was a critical period around 90 days of monkeys. If a monkey didn't form an attachment within those 90 days, it would never form an attachment. Bowlby proposed that there is a critical period in humans as well, around 2, maybe 2.5 years, when the infant attachment system is active. But Bowlby viewed this as more of a sensitive period. He didn't think of it as a critical period. He looked at it as more of a sensitive period. A child is maximally sensitive at the age of 2. But if an attachment is not formed in this time, a child will find it much harder to form one later, but it is not impossible, is what Bowlby said. So he liked to think of it as a sensitive period rather than a critical period. Right, critical period, give that a go. We've had a look at it before. Fill in the gaps. Give yourself a minute or two. Try and fill in the gaps and we'll go through the answers now. Critical period. The critical period refers to the time within which an attachment must form, if it is to form at all. Lorenz and Harlow noted that attachment in birds and monkeys had critical periods. Bowlby extended the idea to humans, proposing that human infants have a sensitive period, after which it will be much more difficult to form an attachment. Okay? So he liked this idea of a critical period, but didn't think of it as so cut and dry. It's really difficult to form an attachment after these 2.5 years, but not impossible. critical period in humans. Bowlby proposed that a child is most sensitive at around 6-7 months, and this may extend up to the age around 2 to 2.5 years. Right, here's an application question. Millie and Mark, apply our knowledge to a scenario. That is application, AO2. Bowlby identified a critical or sensitive period after which human children cannot easily form a secure attachment. Mark and Millie are considering adopting a child. They have made contact with a potential adoptee with a troubled past. The boy, Hugo, is now 4 years old. For his first 2 years, Hugo lived in an abusive family and never formed a proper attachment. Based on your understanding of the ideas of the critical period, what advice might you give to Mark and Millie? Apply what you know to this scenario. Use their names. Quote part of the question in your answer to justify your answers. Give yourself 5 minutes. Off you go. Application question. Let's have a look at the answer. Based on your understanding of the ideas of the critical period, what advice might you give to Mark and Millie? Now, Bowlby identified a sensitive period of around 2 years or so after birth by which a child normally develops an attachment relationship to a caregiver. Because Hugo is now 4 and has never had the chance to form an attachment, Millie and Mark may have to work harder than usual to develop a close relationship to Hugo. However, Bowlby did not agree that the first 2 years is a critical period. He suggested it was a sensitive period and therefore attachment can still form later on. With increased effort on the part of caregivers, there is therefore a good chance that if Millie and Mark do put the work in, they will still be able to develop an attachment with Hugo. And that is social releases and the critical period. Identify one thing you've learned about social releases and the critical period. Why do you think learning about these are important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? What additional questions do you have on this topic? Okay, social releases in the critical period. Huzzah! We've done it. We're moving on to the internal working model. This is the first time we've come across this term before. It does come up again on later lessons and in other lessons, but let's have a look. Bowlby proposed that a child forms a mental representation of their relationship with their primary caregiver. This is called an internal working model because it serves as a model or a template for what relationships are like. It therefore has a powerful effect on the nature of the children's future relationships. So, a child whose first experience is of a loving relationship with a reliable caregiver will tend to form an expectation that all relationships are as loving and reliable. And they'll bring these qualities to future relationships because they formed a mental representation, an internal working model that relationships are loving, they're good. However, it's quite dramatic. A child whose first relationship involves poor treatment will tend to form further poor relationships in which they expect such treatment from others or treat others in that way. We only accept the love that we think we deserve. Right. Most importantly, the internal working model affects a child's later ability to be a parent themselves. People tend to base their parenting behavior on their own experiences of being parented. This explains why children from functional families tend to have similar families themselves. So, if you're a child and say, for example, you don't have a very good childhood and you get beaten as a child, according to Bowlby, you will create an internal working model, and what we'll find is your later ability to be a parent will be reflected in your parenting style as well, and therefore make it more likely that you will beat your children as well. Now, it's not always 100%. It's not always cause and effect. It's not that deterministic, but that's what Bowlby suggests. There we go. Internal working models. What are internal working models? Complete the definition. Give that a go now, please. Draw a picture to illustrate the key term as well. Let's engage those creative sides, okay? It's important we have all these key words and we understand them and use them in our answers, because that shows that we're a higher caliber student. Internal working models are the mental, say it out loud so I can hear you, representations. Thank you. Actually do it. I know you're just sitting there, but say it out loud. Why not? We all carry with us of our attachment to our primary caregiver. They are important in affecting our future relationships because they carry our perception of what relationships are like. Okay? It's our mental representation, or I like to describe it as a template of all future relationships. Okay, we've got a small activity now. Question. We have now learned about two different explanations of why children form attachments, but can you identify if the baby is describing the learning theory or Bowlby's monotropic theory of attachments? Okay? Here we go. This theory suggests that children form attachments with whoever feeds them. That is the learning theory. This theory suggests that attachment is a two-way process because of mutual reinforcements. Which one? It's the learning theory again. Reinforcements, okay? Positive and negative reinforcement. That was operant conditioning. This theory suggests attachment is an innate drive. Bowlby's monotropic theory, good, right? The learning theory suggests that attachment is learned. It's learnt through our experiences. Whereas Bowlby's monotropic theory says attachment is innate. It's a survival thing. It's evolutionary. This theory is questioned by the findings of Schaefer and Emerson about babies being attached to mothers, even if they were not the one who feeds them. That's the learning theory. This theory suggests that crying and smiling are adaptations for attachment. What are we saying? Bowlby? Good. And what are they called when a baby's crying and smiling? What are these called? The things that make adults want to take care of them and attach and love the kids? Social releases, yes. This theory suggests that early attachments, early relationships lead to the formation of an internal working model. We've just done that, so we should know that is Bowlby's monotropic theory. This theory is called into question by the findings of studies such as Isabella et al. That focus on the needs for carers to be sensitive to infants' needs. That's the learning theory. This theory suggests that babies attach to the primary caregiver as they enjoy the experience of being close to them. Generally, if we experience something as a positive experience, then we seek to repeat it. That is the learning theory as well. This theory is also known as the evolutionary theory of attachment. Not the learning theory, that's Bowlby's monotropic theory. This theory suggests that babies have an innate set of social releases, like smiling, that they use to activate the caregiver's attachment system. Bowlby. How many more is there? This theory suggests that attachment occurs because of the regular association of two stimuli, for example, food and the primary caregiver. That is clearly the learning theory. There we go. Whew. Right. Identify one thing you've learned about internal working models. Okay? Why do you think learning about internal working models is important? How does it apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? Maybe this is good information for, love agencies. Shows that you've got to deal with your attachment issues first before you can find love. There we go. And that is the internal working model. Let's have a look at discussing and evaluating Bowlby's monotropic theory. What do you think about it? Do you like it? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Why do you think it's good? Why do you think it's bad? Are there any supporting evidence? Are there any conflicting evidence? This is evaluation. What are some of the strengths and limitations of Bowlby's monotropic theory? Right, here we go. Mixed evidence for monotropy. It is unclear whether there is some unique attachment or there is something unique about the first attachment. Studies of attachment to mother and father tend to show that attachment to the mother is more important in predicting later behavior. Seuss et al. 1992, and that supports monotropy. However, this could simply mean that attachment to the primary attachment figure is just stronger than other attachments, not necessarily that it is different in quality. So therefore, people are arguing that maybe it's not necessarily monotropic. The jury is still out on monotropy. So that's weakness, that's a limitation. But there is support for social releases. In our lesson 1, we learnt about some of these social releases. Brazelton et al. Instructed primary attachment figures to ignore the baby's social releases, as we saw in the still face experiment in lesson 1. Babies who were previously shown to be previously responsive became very distressed, right? When the mother wasn't reciprocating the emotions, the baby became very upset. This supports the idea that social releases play an important role in attachment development. And then finally, there is support for internal working models by research. Let's have a look at this one. The idea of internal working models is testable because it predicts that patterns of attachment will be passed from one generation to the next. How do you know this? Well, Bailey et al. In 2007 tested this idea. They assessed 99 mothers with 1-year-old babies on the quality of their attachment to their own mothers using a standard interview procedure. The researchers also assessed the attachment of the babies to the mothers by observation. It was found that the mothers who reported poor attachments to their own parents in the interviews were much more likely to have children classified as poor according to the observations. This supports the idea that, as Bowlby said, an internal working model of attachment was being passed through the families. So this supports the idea of internal working model. Okay, those mothers that had poor relationship with their mothers were more likely to have poor relationships with their children. Okay, so it's showing that you create these mental representations on what a good relationship or a good attachment will look like. If you don't have a good experience with this, you are likely to have poor attachments to your own children. This supports Bowlby's monotropic theory of the internal working model. Right, can you summarize each of those evaluative points into exactly 10 words? Give that a go now, please. 5 minutes, summarize them into 10 words. We're condensing them down, we're thinking hard. Challenge. Can you think of any further criticisms of your own using Graves' Scout? Grave. Generalizability. Any issues with the generalizability of the research? Reliability. Is the research reliable? A. Application. How does this research apply to real life? V. Validity. Right? Is the research valid? E. Ethics. Any issues with ethical issues? Scout. Any theories? Is there any supporting research to Bowlby's monotropic theory? Is there C. Any conflicting research? O. Is there any other explanations? U. How useful is this theory? T. Is it testable? Okay? And that's the evaluation of Bowlby's monotropic theory. I've ticked it off. We're moving on to the plenary. Forward ho leaflet. What every parent needs to know about attachment. I want you to engage your creative side. Design a leaflet for parents to impart the knowledge we have learned over the attachment unit on what you think is useful for parents to know about attachment. Consider what parents are likely to be concerned about and how they might be reassured. What parents need to know about attachment, development, evidence from research. And that was lesson 7, Bowlby's monotropic theory. Next lesson is going to be lesson 8, Ainsworth's strange situation. Well done, my neo-psychologist. Brilliant work today. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills, cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex, they told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick, now load up the film.